party tonight. Alright! We're gonna have a TV party, alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Everybody's gonna hang out here tonight! Alright! We'll pass out on the couch. Alright! Tonight! We've got nothing better to do than watch TV and have a couple of brews. Don't talk about anything else. We don't wanna know. We're dedicated to our favorite shows.
And tonight, our favorite show is Weeds, brought to you by Jenji Kohan and the good people at Showtime. Weeds ran from, it was 8 seasons, 102 episodes, and I believe it ran from, let's see here, August 8th of 2005 all the way to July 1st, or rather September 16th of 2012. So, why are we talking about Weeds tonight here on TV Party Tonight, as brought to you by your mandated reporter, and frankly I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radledge? Well, here's the deal. I watched and reviewed Glow with a good friend of the show, Sean Comer, and that's, of course, a Jenji Kohan show. We followed that up about a week later or so with Season 6 of Orange is the New Black. And I found myself missing Jenji Kohan type material. I was in a bit of a withdrawal, you see. So, I was looking around and like, well, what else can I watch that this person has done? And Weeds has been sitting on my Netflix list for quite some time now. The other side of that is that anytime we've talked about Glow or Orange is the New Black, Sean Comer constantly brings up Nancy Botwin, who is
I'm fucking right.
Your main character from the show Weeds. And I finally said, I can't do another show with this man until I find out what this broad did for 8 seasons that's got him so hot and bothered. So,
stuff it with this put-upon mandated reporter business. Of course, it was a fine show you were also missing out on. You're welcome.
Of course, the voice you hear who's fed up with my nonsense is, of course, Sean Comer. How do you do, sir?
Hi, everybody. I'm Sean. You're not. You're listening to our show.
So there you have it. So between the constant references to Nancy Botwin plus my withdrawal from all things Jenji Kohan, I was like, all right, I got to dig deep into this show. And just like when I binge watched Game of Thrones, I started, a little pensive, a little tentative, a little, I don't know about this. I don't know if I'm going to really like this. And, by the end of the first week of watching it, my wife was like, are you ever going to interact with the family again? That's what happens, folks. I fall into a show hole. I don't come up again until we're all done. So we're going to talk about the entire series here of Weeds. Now, Sean, I always like to know what you watched it when it aired on Showtime. You brought this show up consistently. You've also brought up Dexter, which I think was a contemporary of the show. What was going on with you? What brought you to Weeds?
Well, as it happens, at the time, the way I remember it, it's one of those shows that came recommended to me over time by several different people. As it happened, this one was suggested by a wonderful, incredibly wise, intelligent college friend of mine named Abby Simons, who also referred me to Dexter and True Blood. As it happened, I had been looking for, this was back in the day before streaming, when Netflix was disc only. Or rather, at the time, I think it was that they had the streaming service, but all you could get were these really shitty, god-awful B-movies. Nothing that would make you grateful that was how you would spend 90 minutes to 2 hours of your life. And so I'd been looking for something fresh to check out. And I remembered hearing vaguely about the show during its first couple seasons and knowing that it revolved around a pot-dealing suburban mom, but really precious little else. And I think it was about, how long into its run is it? I think it was about 4 or 5 seasons into its run. And I grabbed the first season in pretty short order, checked it out, and the humor, the characters, the fact that Celia Hodes reminds me of the woman who once could have very nearly been my mother-in-law, it sucked me in within the first episode. 25 minutes, and I was absolutely 100% hooked. And so I got the second season, then I got the third season, and then I started catching up to the latter ones, and I just thought, couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? You had the perfect place for it to end, but nope, the dead horse was not glue yet.
Yeah, there's almost 2 shows here, and I want to talk about this right off the bat. We all know where my tastes lie. Right now, a contemporary show that I'm interested in that pretty much like sums up the kind of show I like to watch the most is Snowfall on FX, which is the story, kind of, sort of, maybe, about how the CIA sold crack in Los Angeles. How crack came to Los Angeles. And I don't want to get into whether or not that's a real thing, or anything else about it, but that's the premise of the show. Now, big fan of The Wire, The Shield. I like the gritty cop/drug dealer type shows. So, and I also like a good prison show, hence my love of Orange is the New Black and Oz. So that being said,
speaking of shows one of us never shuts up about,
go on. And someday you can host your own TV party and talk about The Wire.
One day we will have a little role reversal, and we will indeed host a special edition podcast in which Sean finally starts catching up on all the great shows that Mark has been yammering and blah 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 yakety schmacketying about for years.
That's right.
And then you can go, and then we can go ahead and just take the piss out of each other. It'll be a whole Freaky Friday thing.
I'll tell you. So. The pitch about this show was, well, if you like any of these shows that have to do with drugs and gangs and whatnot, this has sort of the Breaking Bad appeal to it, where it's, or Ozark, where you have the suburbanite that is engulfed in a world, in the world of drugs and crime and whatnot, the fish out of water suburbanite type thing.
Sort of.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. And it's like I said, it's almost 2 distinct shows featuring the same cast of characters between seasons 1 through 3 and then 4 through 8. And here's what I mean by that. In the first 3 seasons, the premise is that you have this widow who is trying to maintain their upper middle class lifestyle, living in this suburban town, pre-planned suburban town of Agrestic. And so looking around at, and she says this later on in the series, much later on in the series, she can't just get a job. I think she was like a dance student when she was in college. She has no skills for which she can apply for a job that would pay her enough to maintain their current lifestyle. So she starts selling pot. So right off the bat, again, kind of like our lead in Breaking Bad, you have somebody who's down on their luck who makes a decision to do something illegal for the greater good. And for the first 3 seasons, I get her point. I really am. I'm sympathetic to Nancy Botwin for seasons 1 through 3 because I believe that she, in earnest, meant to do the right thing and that she didn't think she was doing any harm, by just selling weed. It's seasons 4 through 8 where she has no good reason to keep doing it, and yet she does, and they start bringing out this, like, danger seeker personality in her, somebody who seems to be just attracted to crime and crime lords, that I kind of threw my hands up and went, you're just a terrible character now. I have no sympathy for you. And then and then the series becomes, let's follow Nancy and her family, as she continues to make one terrible mistake after another for no good reason. Which is, again, is entirely different thematically than the first 3 seasons. So you know what I'm saying, Sean? Like, the first 3 seasons for me were a lot easier to watch and understand Nancy's point of view than anything that followed it.
Oh, completely. Absolutely. She just... And here's the thing about Weeds. For a certain point, and I would even say this continued up through seasons 4 and 5 with certain characters, namely Silas and Shane. The thing that differentiates it so much, in my opinion, from the likes of, say, and I know we may beg to differ on this a little bit. From, you mentioned Breaking Bad and Ozark, is up to a certain point, you see people who feel relatable, genuine pangs of remorse or regret or second-guessing about the terrible choices that they've made. With Nancy, it's like you said, you took the words right out of my mouth, in fact. She just becomes a progressively worse and worse person and learns nothing for every time that consequences slap her in the face. Just one right after another. And the thing is, the other problem with that is, the characters around her, while you feel sorry for them, with the possible exception of maybe Shane, they don't really become better people for anything that they go through. In fact, they just kind of become worse and worse people, to the point where even when it comes to them, you want to go, okay, I feel for you. This woman has got the reverse Midas touch. Every piece of gold she touches turns to shit. But that doesn't excuse your obvious character flaws either. Silas becomes a bigger and bigger douchebag as he goes on. Andy, pretty much for most of the show, continues to be a careless, shiftless, slacker layabout. Doesn't really evolve all that much. Celia doesn't learn a goddamn thing for everything she loses. Fuck's sake. The woman goes through a divorce. She loses her breast to cancer. She completely and unrepentantly alienates herself from her daughter. Doesn't change her in the slightest. In fact, you can sum her up entirely with one exchange that she has with Isabel in, I believe it was late in the first season, when Celia has made her recovery from cancer. She's, got her new surgically reconstructed pair of pleasure zeppelins. She's got a brassy blonde wig and everything, and she's gone from actually coming across for a fleeting moment, like there might be a human being in there, to all of a sudden going right back to being the sometimes borderline sociopath that she is.
I was going to say, there's no borderline about it.
Yeah. I'm trying to be generous here. And Isabel just flat out asks her, so are you sure you're not going to die? Because when you were going to die, you were a much better person. Does it change a fucking thing? Fuck no. Absolutely not. I mean, Kevin Nealon's Doug Wilson character continuing to be kind of a lovable dimwit. Okay, I can live with the fact that he doesn't change. Because you have to maintain some sense of levity throughout the show. But as for everybody else, you just keep waiting for them to have that moment when something that they've been through, or something that they've seen Nancy do, or something that's been inflicted on them, has made them go, wow, I really should probably get my act together and try actually not being an asshole. About the only one who seems to get it is Shane. And he has to become a violent, briefly alcoholic little weirdo for a little bit himself before he gets that. And there it's kind of relatable because he's dealing with the fact that he of the two brothers was closest to their late father. And the death really continues to hit him harder and harder throughout the first two seasons. And finally, after he goes through this rebellious, violent phase and having a few substance abuse problems of his own, he shapes up and eventually joins the police academy. Which, hey, good on you, kid. Good on you. But it's seemingly rare. And Mark, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Did it ever strike you that Nancy felt any of the Walter White-like prolonged misery over everything he had reaped, or everything she had reaped for all her actions?
No, that's the thing is she becomes almost a different character starting in season 4. Where season 3, I feel like the character was written as to feeling the weight of her decisions and somewhat wrestling with the ethics of it all. You know, I think she was trying to keep this part of herself in a box and outwardly project, you know, I'm a mother and I'm a suburbanite and I'm a PTA member and I'm all of these things and I'm really trying to keep it all together, and I was not ready for my partner to suddenly leave me holding the bag and all of this. To, you know, you talked about Celia. I would tell you Nancy's just as much of a sociopath going forward from season 4.
Quite possibly.
I don't think she feels the repercussions of her decisions at all, including when she finally leads Esteban and Guillermo into the waiting arms of the police. And, you know, and then they fast forward into the next season with her having served a 3-year prison sentence. And she, you know, and again, she's just a miserable human being.
She comes right out and she starts dealing hash.
Yeah, immediately. Like,
if I recall correctly, I believe the way that came about was she got a job as a housekeeper, and she then figured out a way to use the hotel the dryers at the hotel she worked at to cook hash.
That's before she comes
Was
out
it,
of the. She comes out.
Order?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where they're still on the run.
Okay.
From Esteban, she comes out of prison. She's in the halfway house. And, you know, the halfway house is supposed to be an opportunity for her to get her life together. And she, you know, and it's this giant inconvenience for her. And I think she leans on Doug to get her a job at the hedge fund that he's currently working at. And within hours of being there, tries to push the local pot dealer out of that market so she can take it over. And again, she's in a position. Here's the thing: throughout seasons 4 through 8, she had at any one of those times she no longer had to deal drugs. She didn't have this enormous prefab suburban house to take care of anymore. Right? They were living with her father-in-law. Right? So she could have gotten a job. And I wanted to get to. I want to get to the front that she's running in a minute, because that also annoyed the shit out of me. But
the bakery?
No, the maternity store.
Oh, gotcha.
All right, so once they've left Agrestic, the argument that, well, I have to do this to maintain our lifestyle no longer applies. They're living with the father-in-law, who then takes off for Europe. So she's living in a house for free. At that point, she could have just gotten a job, and that would have been it. She chooses to hold on to this lifestyle and work for Guillermo. And when Guillermo says, "You're really no good to me in any role other than being a proper front," she fights it, and she makes all of these decisions, and goes out of her way put herself in harm's way because she wants to be closer to the criminal lifestyle. And it's like, okay, at this point now you just want to be a criminal. And this is what, and there's no, and it's almost as if being a mom to Shane no longer matters to her. It's like, well, you know, her parting words in season 3 are something along the lines of, "I'm sorry, Judah, I tried." And I feel like that line resonates through the rest of the season, through the rest of the series, where it's like, I tried being a mom, I failed, I give up. But
let's play a little game of before and after here, shall we? You talk about Nancy's history with fronts. In the first season, when Doug introduces this concept to her, at one point she looks at him with Mary-Louise Parker's endearing softball-sized doe eyes, those big, big, beautiful eyes, and says, "Is there a possibility that my front might one day become my real business?" I'm genuinely hoping. Wait, you mean to tell... Wait, maybe one day I could do this instead of slinging weed. And she actually proves to be not exactly terrible initially at running a bakery. You know, she has a chance, but she goes from that to then having a chance to possibly maybe build up her own successful maternity store. No, fuck that. I'm just going to use that to cover for the weed. I don't want a legitimate business. Screw that noise.
Well, that's the thing. They asked her, don't worry about the back. Don't worry about the underground tunnel to Mexico. Just run the store. And even that became too difficult for her. You know? Because here's where I was going with this. I feel like in the first 3 seasons, she was trying to be a mom to both Silas and Shane. She really was, in earnest, doing her level best. When it all goes to hell and she burns Agrestic down, with the help of Guillermo, it's almost as if she's resigned to, and this is what I wanted to say before, we have 2 counterintuitive things going on. On the one hand, I don't think she wanted to be a mom anymore. I don't think she wanted to be a suburban housewife. I think she'd gotten a taste of the crime world and said, this is what I want to be. I want to be a big-time drug dealer.
Okay, well, okay, and here's another before and after for you. Okay? First season rolls around, and Nancy experiences just exactly this very same problem and gets herself very nearly fucked up over it. She experiences her first drive-by while she's standing around in Halia's kitchen, just, you know, chatting it up with her and Conrad and Celia's daughter. I forget her name.
She's played by Indigo.
Yeah, the one played by Indigo. And just rattles the shit out of her. And then she finds out that she's being pressured by a rival dealer because she tried to expand onto the local college campus. Gets threatened with arrest, has her stash taken, nearly ends up $14,000 in the hole had Conrad not stepped up unbidden to be her knight in shining wife beater. And take the redneck small time security guard down. You would think that would have rattled her. You would have think that would have taught her a lesson about not horning in on somebody else's turf, especially everything else that she had been through, and it apparently did. You see this just exhaustive relief when the whole thing is resolved, and the guard comes around, just says, here, take your stuff. I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were. Please don't ever have me hurt again. And just a few seasons later, where are we? Doesn't fucking learn.
No.
Again, I bring it back to the Breaking Bad comparison, and I see what you were getting at, and it's valid to a point. But by the end of 5 seasons, you got the impression that Walter White was exhausted. He was no longer proud of what he had done, and he realized that he could no longer escape fate in any sense. Not cancer, not the law, not the loss of his family. Nothing took him. Okay, Breaking Bad. About how long in real time does the show span? What are we talking about? A couple of years?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're talking about what, 2-3 years, something like that.
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah. 5 seasons, but it goes by in semi-real time. In Nancy's case, we're talking about, what, 4 or 5 years of the same nonsense, and she still doesn't get it?
No, the difference between Nancy and Walter, where at the end, Walter couldn't live with himself, with the world that he created, and he attempted to redeem himself in fiery glory. The difference with Nancy, at the end, everyone has left her. She's alone, and she doesn't seem to know why. She's like, but I'm Nancy. Like she never has that moment of repentance.
But that's the problem with shows like this. Yeah, to a certain extent, there's an appeal where you could say, "Oh, that Nancy, what monkey shines will your dumb lily white ass get into next?" But the other side of that coin being, after a while, when your characters fail to evolve, it gets dull as shit to just kind of watch them and realize I don't really feel invested in any of you because almost all of you are awful people.
Yeah. What I wanted to draw the comparison to was I said she doesn't seem to want to be a parent, but she doesn't want any of them to leave her. So it's like she creates situations where Silas and Shane and Andy are, have to be attached to her in some way. But she doesn't necessarily want to take care of any of them. She doesn't want to... Andy's in love with her. She won't love him back, but she likes the fact that he's following her around wherever she may go. Mm-hmm. She has these 2 grown sons, okay? But by the time we get to season 4, Silas could have didn't have to go to Ren Mar. Silas could have gone anywhere he wanted. He's a grown-ass man, and he could have long since split from Nancy. Now, at that point, I think Shane's still in high school, so he's still got a little ways to go. But, so I'll make an exception for him. But when they go to Copenhagen, we have the same issue here. Now everyone's an adult. Nobody here has to depend on Nancy, and yet, like little puppy dogs, they all come running home the moment she's out. And she even avoids them. I don't it. I mean, granted, it's a show, and they have to write it to where they're all back together again. That's the whole appeal to this thing. I get that, but if you were to sort of look at this and say, like, well, what if this were reality? I don't think Nancy would have ever gone and looked for her 2 sons again. I think she satisfied the need to be a mom with Stevie Ray. And at that point, she almost no longer had any use for Silas or Shane. Which makes season 7 the most frustrating and awful season of the whole thing. This is the one where they're in New York, and the whole thing centers around her and Silas feuding over the New York pot business. To the point where they're sabotaging each other. And I'm like, okay, so whatever hook there was in this family being together and muddling through and dealing with the consequences of her actions is now gone, and she's just an asshole, surrounded by people who they have to write, they have to write them jumping through hoops and writing circles around to try to figure out how they're going to keep them all together. There's not a single. This is where I'm going to make a comment about the writing. About season 7, the writing really falls off for me because there's no good reason why any one of those characters should have gone back to her. Maybe Shane. Shane probably is the only link in that he murdered somebody for her. I'll give him that much. But why Silas left Copenhagen, there was no rational reason for. Why Andy went back to her, there was no rational reason for. And might I say, after season 3, I don't understand why Kevin Nealon was still on the show. Like, I feel like that was a note from Showtime, where they pitched season 4. They were like, okay, the family's on the run. They're going to go live in San Diego. We're going to bring Albert Brooks on the show. It'll be a whole thing. And somebody on Showtime said, hey, Kevin Nealon tests really well for some odd reason. Figure out a reason for him to follow them to San Diego. What?
Up to a certain point, Nancy ceases to be a character, and she just becomes a thing that happens to people.
Yeah, very much so. She's a force of nature, and a negative one, to say the least. I want to take a break from beating up on Nancy and talk about Celia. Because what I think is masterful about the show is that as much as we're beating up on Nancy, and there's a lot to dislike about her from season 4 on, she's still a charismatic character. She's kind of got that Hulk Hogan quality, where even if you want to hate him for all the bullshit that he's done, he just oozes such charisma. It's kind of hard to. What I like about the writing for the most part of the show is that all of the characters have this sort of needle embedded on them to where they're despicable and they're likable, and they're despicable and they're likable. They're relatable and then they're completely sociopathic. And so I think the biggest example of that is Celia, who started out as a character who I'm like, I'm going to hate this character. This character was absolutely written to be a nemesis for Nancy. And then you find yourself thinking nobody should go through. Nobody, even as a deplorable woman as she is, should go through what she's going through. I truly felt sympathy for her in bits and pieces throughout the show. And then it's almost like your reward for feeling any kind of sympathy and being with this character is for them to make a final decision that's so awful and so stupid and so bad. You're just like, why did I ever feel bad for you ever? Her decision to out drug deal Nancy and try to become a kingpin in her own right. I just found myself, like, if I had had paper in my hands, I would have just thrown them into the air in frustration.
I was, and again, this is going back to the difference between the early seasons and the later ones. I actually thought the episode in which she and not Doug, her husband. Oh, again, I'm blanking on names tonight.
Her husband, is that who you're
yeah.
with?
Yeah.
Dean.
Dean, thank you. I knew it was something with a D. When she and Dean are just having this, and they keep cutting back to it, this series of knockdown, drag-out arguments about their failing marriage. Just one after another after another. And I think I enjoyed it so much because it was easily one of Celia's most dynamic individual episodes. Because, coming from parents who, fought quite a bit when I was growing up myself, that cats and dogs atmosphere really is there, but then there is also that sentiment of them both realizing, they weren't all bad times. And you get to see that play out, and it's really the most human either of them really seem at times throughout the entire show, with the lone possible exception of that being when Celia finds out she has cancer. And even then, that one just kind of spins out into her just going truly almost comically off the rails. Like it becomes exaggerated. Just kind of how far down the rabbit hole she goes. But I don't know. I mean, am I pretty much right about Dean that he more or less just kind of remains a bit of a schlub the entire series, or did I miss something?
No, I thought the most interesting thing about Dean, and it was one of those classic, as we're finding out, Jenji Kohan things where she serves you up an hors d'oeuvre of something, and you're like, ooh, this is a tasty little pig in a blanket. I'd like more, please. There isn't any more. What do you mean? Well, that was it. I literally spent 12 hours making one delightful pig in a blanket.
You know, as Scarlett once said to me in kind of a measure of annoyance, stop feeding me crumbs and just give me the damn cake.
So the pig in the blanket that I'm referring to is when Nancy goes back to Halia, and I believe season 7, to hook up with her and sell MILF weed again. And Dean's living with Halia. And they allude to a relationship between them, but they don't ever take it any further, and it's subsequently dropped after that. And then the next time you see Dean, I want to say, is at Stevie's bar mitzvah, where he talks about Isabella becoming Bruce. There's no mention of Celia, and there's nothing, and they don't pick up on the strain, the thread of what happened with him and Celia. But it was like, that was the most interesting thing they had introduced that entire season, in my opinion, and it was just like, in volleyball terms, it was kind of like they bumped it, and then everyone just sort of turns and walks away, and the ball falls on the floor. And this was our complaint about Glow and Orange is the New Black as well, where Jenji Kohan sometimes introduces a really interesting thread, and then goes, do you like it? Is it nice? Do you like it? Okay, and then walks away from it. You're like, well, what are you going to do with it? Why is it out there? And I don't know if it's purposely poor writing on her part, or is she just like, well, we don't really have anything, sorry, creative has nothing for you, pal. And then they just walk away.
I don't know if Jenji Kohan is actually a wrestling fan, but if she is, I just have this sense that she watched that one moment on SmackDown where Booker T got the note that says, I still know what you did. And she just went, genius. I love this show. This is the paragon of television writing.
We'll just occasionally throw something out of left field on the screen, let it sit there, and promptly never acknowledge it again. Perfect. Lobster.
Yes. You know what? I like to imagine that at some point she sits there and just wishes that GTV had been her idea. Not because she could have done it differently, because she would want credit for doing it exactly the same way.
So I'm just curious. Can you defend, rationalize in any way why any one of the men in her life stayed with her after season 3? Like, and I was talking specifically about Shane. No, not Shane. I'm talking specifically about Silas and Andy. Why in your? I mean, I guess in terms of construct, they needed Andy because it's his father that they're living in the house of. So you kind of need Andy there, at least for that initial connection. But as season 4 rolled into 5 and all of the things that happened therein, especially when you have Silas even saying, "I just want to start my own, pot dispensary. I want nothing to do with you." Well, go be your own man then. Go live somewhere else. Go be a thing. Go do a thing. I'm just wondering if you have any ideas as to, from a writing standpoint, why you think it's defensible that they kept these characters attached to Nancy.
It really isn't.
Okay.
It is indefensible because one of the best examples I can point to is one of my other favorite shows. And don't worry, I'm not going to harangue you for years on end that you need to check this one out, although I would highly recommend it. And that was the FX drama Damages.
Okay.
Stars Glenn Close as, man, shark is almost too cuddly a word to describe the civil attorney that she plays. But the way that played out, and granted it was an entirely different show This was a dark drama. It was not a dramedy. There are no bones about that. But Patty Hughes also systematically runs everybody she loves out of her life behind the force of her own ambition, which is just an absolute runaway train. Unfortunately, it's also one that's often running with no conductor. But at the end of the show, there is no happy-go-lucky resolution where everybody gathers back around her and everyone comes back into her life and nobody can really let her go because, they just love her so much. No, she has ruined people. They have remembered it and they have walked away, and the show ends with her being maddeningly successful, but clearly also alone. And it plays out in such a way over the course of I think it ran 5 seasons, that you can't really argue with it. This is not a woman that deserves a happy ending. Everything she did, she 100% did to herself, just the same as Nancy. And sometimes that's the bitter real pill that you have to swallow. I think what they were going for here was something that myself and a lot of other people with flawed parents keep coming back to, and that is, we have a hard time letting go entirely because some hopeful part of us still remembers the better times and wants to believe that it's possible to turn things around, so that is all we have from that point forward, or at least that's all that we end up being able to choose to remember. And sometimes, some families can make that work. In this instance, it just doesn't seem plausible. Just considering just the sheer scope of how much Nancy puts them through. She burned down a suburb. She didn't just burn down their house. She burned down the neighborhood. The whole fucking thing. She chases people off. She gets an, admittedly corrupt DEA agent killed. She puts people's lives at stake with her own recklessness. She forces her family to basically live like a band of gypsies, and instead of actually settling in and trying to make things right and get a fresh start, no, she figures that the whole problem was that she had a good plan badly executed, and that she can somehow fix it. She is John fucking Hammond. The Velociraptor could be chewing her tits off, and she would insist, no, this was not a bad idea. Now, next time.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about Kevin Nealon for a second, just because, in the hour that we have to discuss this, he's a main character for all 8 seasons of the show, 5 of which he's utterly useless. But specifically, they make a decision with him. And it had me thinking of some other shows where something happens and it's so, it's entirely realistic that somebody would decide, I'm going to engage in a criminal enterprise for the betterment of my family. It's not a decision everyone would make, but certainly some people do make that decision for better or for worse. And so there is a degree of relatability and believability in Weeds to a point. And that point is where Doug starts a cult. You ever have just one of those moments where you're watching a TV show, you're like, okay, I'm with you, I'm in the fucking ditch, and you've taken off without me. I cannot go with you any further. The the fact that he's sort of a corrupt CPA who likes to get high and is just, sort of American beautied with his own life, if you know what I mean. If you've ever, I'm sure you've seen the movie with Kevin Spacey. Sure. The whole movie's about midlife crisis and just sort of looking at the mirror and seeing, the reflection back is this, this pale suburbanite, dead-eyed comer goer. And it's like, okay, I get that. Boy, has Hollywood had a time with that particular motif. Okay, if you were to believe Hollywood, all of us middle-aged white men hate our fucking lives and are this close to killing ourselves. Not all
of us are unfortunately so close to sticking it in Mina Suvari.
But and then you have this Kevin Nealon character who's much of the same thing, and it's fine for a few seasons, and you're right, he's great comic relief. At which point, it's like, I can't remember a good example of this, but it's right on the tip of my tongue, where you have a character who started out moderately dumb. Okay, like Homer Simpson. Okay, is probably a good example of this. Homer Simpson, the first couple of seasons of The Simpsons, is oafish, but he's not altogether stupid.
He's a lovable oaf.
The same thing with Peter Griffin. Peter Griffin is supposed to be a mocking character of the TV sitcom Dead. It's not until later seasons that he's certifiably retarded.
Yeah, or in the Simpsons case, enter jerk-ass Homer.
Right. I think it's later seasons in The Simpsons where where Homer's having arguments with his own brain. And I think they even said on The Simpsons, over the years, they've just made him dumber and dumber and dumber. And that's kind of what happens with Kevin Nealon on the show, where it's like the first 3 seasons, he's just kind of a dead-eyed suburbanite who's just trying to find a way to get through his humdrum life. And then he decides he's going to follow Nancy because she's making good life decisions. And he appears to be just on the he appears to be like Mitsoplex. He's just on the show to cause fucking chaos. Silas has a perfectly good dispensary going. I'm going to eat up the profits and smoke them. All right. Yeah. The family's on the run. He essentially becomes Andy's fucking sidekick. And then when he's in New York, he's like, we want you to be a CPA. I don't want to be. I'm kind of done with that. He's like, yeah, but here's an opportunity to use steroids and cookbooks. Sure, why not?
He basically becomes Quagmire. He becomes Norton. Mm-hmm. He becomes what was the name of the womanizer from Three's Company?
Oh gosh, I remember the name of the bar. It was the Regal Beagle. But Jack and I know who you're talking about. But okay, the womanizer from Three's Company neighbor. Got it.
Yeah, that guy. That's basically, he becomes the wacky neighbor with the wacky neighbor with the get rich quick schemes.
Mm-hmm. He's Mrs. Achmonic from Elf.
Yeah, there you go.
Just progressively weirder and weirder and weirder to the point where it's not even self-parody anymore. It's just you're just one walking gag, and at the point where he has such cult of personality that he actually literally forms his own cult. I'm like, the show has lost all believability for me. At least Nancy was made to, at least on paper, pay for her crime. She did 3 years in prison. She's had to start from the bottom again. She suffers losses. Nancy, for all of her bad mistakes that she makes, for all of her choices, Nancy suffers. I don't think Doug ever suffered. Or at least he had any kind of self-awareness that he could acknowledge the suffering, and then to give him in writing such a reward that somehow somehow he had this inner quality to where people would follow him in his nonsense. I'm like, okay, if you're writing a joke, a very complex and extended joke, fine. some people might look at this and be entertained by Kevin Nealon being a cult leader. I just looked at it and I was like, well, this seems to be an exercise in jerking off.
Doug Wilson is a character that would have been greatly improved by actually having a laugh track just for him, because at least then you would have gotten the impression, fuck it, at least they're being honest about it.
Right. Yeah, he like one of those bits on Family Guy where they actually have the audience track.
Yeah, precisely. But no, the God, I hate to use an axiom so trite as jump the shark, but my God, that moment when he starts the cult, it's just wee! Oh, hey, Bruce!
You get the feeling after about season 5, Jenji Kohan really wanted to just end the show. And Showtime was like, no, you can't. This is still winning for us. Figure out something to do. And seasons 6, 7, and 8 are her and her writing team just throwing shit at the board to see what would stick.
You know what? It's like when an already shitty Chuck Lorre comedy hits about 12 seasons. Past a certain point, there are just expectations, you know?
Yeah. I definitely get the feeling after 2 seasons in Ren Mar, you know, from they going on the run, and then hey, we haven't done New York yet, and then well, we got to wrap this up. Honestly, the show could have ended a couple of different times. Obviously, burning down Agrestic, it really should have been the end of the show, but it goes for 2 more seasons with Shane killing the woman, and then going on the run. Probably could have ended there. Season 6 is a fucking waste. It could have ended at the end of even 7 with, who shot Nancy and just leaving it ambiguous. But I'll tell you, it led to one of the moments that made me hate Nancy as a character. She makes one decision in the finale season 8, based off of her being shot in the head, that made me just utterly hate her as a character. And that is when Shane goes to arrest her murderer, her attempted murderer, killer, and she starts sticking up for him. She, to assuage her own guilt, she's willing to take a bullet in the head from the kid and let him go scot-free because she feels guilt over his dad dying. And this is with respect to her never fully being behind Shane being a police officer. I was like, wow, you're just a shit human being. And I'm glad that at least they saved something as despicable as all that for the last season. But it never quite recovers for me. And so at the end, I don't know what you're made to feel. And I guess we'll start to wrap up after this. I don't know what you're made to feel for Nancy when everyone's decided to leave her and she's just sitting on the back porch silently smoking a joint with the main cast of characters. But I was like, get it over with already. You deserve everything you're getting here, and probably more.
Just, this show, to kind of ease into our wrap-up a little bit, was the product of what I consider kind of the golden age of Showtime original dramas. I don't know how many other shows from that period you've watched, but the ones that come to mind are Queer as Folk, which I've never watched, always meant to get around to it, never did.
Never saw it. Actually, most of the Showtime shows I've never seen.
Californication is another one. Both are available on Netflix, so I have no excuse for not having checked them out. Trying to remember if the L Word was on around this time. I think it was, or I may be a little bit off there. But the 3 that I have seen are obviously, and Nurse Jackie. Nurse Jackie is another one that I would throw in there.
Yeah, Nurse Jackie's on my list.
I love Nurse Jackie. You're in for a treat. But of those, Dexter, depending on how you look at it, stuck around anywhere from 1 to 3 seasons too long. Maybe even Oh, we ran 8 seasons. I grudgingly admit that. I kind of like to pretend the 8th never happened. There's an argument that it could have ended after season 4, but I don't think 5 was all that bad. And even if it had to go on, 7 brought it full circle to the very first novel's ending, which would have been perfect because the entire first season, was a loose adaptation of the plot of the first book. So that would have been a fine place to go on. But no, they dragged it out for one more season, and 8 it's irredeemable. It is unspeakably, irredeemably awful, and I lump it in there with the 9th season of Scrubs as shows where I just say, nope, didn't happen. that season never happened, not even in an It's a Fever Dream way. If I decide to rewatch that show, I'm not watching the last season. I will end this show the way I want to. So that went on a season too long. Weeds, as we've established by now, depending on how you feel about seasons 4 and 5, it went on anywhere from 3 to 5. The season's way too long. They ran out of track on this story so damn fast. 3 was probably where it should have just trailed off, because they just had nowhere interesting or redeemable to go with anybody after that. Of the shows I've seen all the way through to completion, and I admit I still have to get through the rest of Nurse Jackie, which I intend to do soon. United States of Terra, I think, was the one that it ended prematurely. It was canceled quite suddenly, but somehow the ending of it still pretty much works. The characters developed in meaningful ways for everything that they had been through. There was a sense of satisfaction with where we were leaving most of them off. They had grown. They weren't the same people that we started off season 1, episode 1 with. It felt fine. To borrow a line from The Death of Deadpool, I can live with this ending. I think that's it. I may have that line wrong. Jesse Starcher, Ben Cologne. If I cocked that one up, feel free to point it out to me. But I think I got that one right. This one, god damn, I don't know what it is, but they just had no idea when to stop.
When I think about TV show endings, the three characters that I go to that feature most prominently in my head are they got what they deserved at the end of the show. You have McNulty in The Wire, who I don't want to give it away, but by the end of it, by the end of all things, he's lost everything, and he brought it on himself. Same thing with what's his face from The Shield,
Vic Mackey.
Vic Mackey. Vic Mackey. It's kind of an ambiguous ending, but up to the point where the where there is ambiguity. He's lost everything. He's lost his family. He's lost his job. He has no attachments, and he's just sort of adrift. And he's brought it on himself. Walter White's dead. Walter White goes out in a blaze of glory. But in doing so, at the time that he makes that decision, he has lost everything. I feel like Nancy is one of those people who should have lost everything, and in a way she does, but we don't necessarily see it. It's alluded to. It's going to happen. Everyone's going to go their own separate way, and she is going to be alone. But the show ends just before that, and I think we're kind of robbed of that McNulty, Mackey, Walter White moment of this is where all your decisions led you. Instead, you get this reflexive moment where they're smoking pot on the back staircase, and it's like, I feel like for all this talk that we have of the show ended way too late, the finale ends a little too early for me. I feel like Nancy should have been back there alone. And I think it was a missed opportunity, as if to say, as if Jenji Kohan was very protective of this lead and didn't want her to come across, didn't want the audience to judge her too harshly. And so the final images of her with her family around her, even though they won't be there in the next frame. And I'm like, I would have preferred a more pensive, reflective McNulty Mackie moment. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you think, but that's sort of my parting words on the subject. Is it's an entertaining show, but I feel like, unlike the writers of The Wire, The Shield, and Breaking Bad, I feel like Jenji made it a point to put some protective covering over this treasured character that I don't think deserves it.
No, she doesn't, and again, that's the problem. Few of her characters ever do, and maybe at some point she'll explain in such a way that she goes, "Well, yeah, but that's kind of what I meant." Is that not everybody gets a moment of redemption. Some people are just terrible. Okay, why do you think we want to watch shows where your main characters, the ones we're supposed to care so much about, just continuously become worse?
It makes me wonder how Ruth and Debbie and what's her face on Orange Is the New Black? Come on, help me.
Piper.
Piper.
Oh, Piper. Okay, I was thinking of Glow for a second. I was like, which what's her face on Glow?
An awesome Kong? What are you talking about? No, it makes me wonder where we're going to leave Piper, Debbie, and Ruth at the end of all things with their respective shows. I wonder if Jenji Kohan has matured as a producer and a writer to where both shows will end with our leads laid bare. But then again, Piper and Ruth and Debbie up to this point haven't made nearly the enormous amount of horrible decisions that Nancy has. In the pantheon of the Genji-verse, Nancy is by far the worst character she's written.
All things considered, Ruth made one bad decision.
Yeah.
She made one decision that she then spent 2 seasons trying to dig herself out of a hole from. Debbie's bad decisions are mounting fast.
she's certainly catching up on Nancy.
She's gaining ground. She's nowhere near there yet, but
no.
Yeah, she's gaining ground. Piper, in the last season, you know what? It was like watching a longtime professional wrestler who spent most of his career as a heel, but has become such a legend, such an icon, that they're allowed to go out as a face. It's Andre the Giant at the end of WrestleMania 6.
I was thinking, I was actually thinking, Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, where, at towards the end there, he was just kind of doing a thing, and it didn't really matter anymore. His best days were behind him. He's just sort of there now. Dependable hand, but not really doing much of anything.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I kind of go with Andre because, Piper has really spent most of this show as almost an outright villain.
Mm-hmm.
And then right at the end of this most recent season, she finally seems to get it together.
Yeah.
And it's like the moment when Andre finally snaps out of it and dumps Haku over the top rope and starts paintbrushing Bobby Heenan, and he gets to ride out of Skydome to the appreciative cheers of the Canadian crowd.
It does make me wonder if anyone listening to this podcast ever goes back and tells Jenji Kohan how often her shit's compared to professional wrestling.
Damn, but that's a good question. And not always in good ways.
Well, I can't think of any better way to end this show, so I think that wraps up our discussion of weeds. I've gotten that monkey off my back. I've gotten it all off my chest. I'm prepared to move on with my life. Speaking of moving on with my life, let's see. We've got an on trial on September 4th for Barbed Wire, from Pam Anderson. I'm sure that'll be a lot of fun. And I think that's your last appearance. No.
Wait, what's the date?
September 4th.
Oh, this is gonna be interesting. This is gonna be fun.
And then if Sean can get some of his friends together who are interested in doing so, we're going to do a TV party tonight on September 13th for Insatiable, featuring former Jessie star Debbie Ryan. So I'm looking forward to that. In addition to which, we've got TV parties for Legion, Cloak and Dagger, The Predator, Damn You Hollywood, Iron Fist Season 2, and speaking of suburbanites and criminal situations, Ozark Season 2. We've got Metal Hammer reviews for Alice in Chains, Bullet for My Valentine, The New Clutch, Corporal Kalani, Therapy with a question mark, and Power Glove, as we get into all covers all the time in the month of October. Over on the comic side, we've got X-Men Legacy. This is one of those shows where I hope you're not interested in hearing what the comic's about, because we shit all over it. We've got Barbed Wire, of course, the impetus for the on trial we're going to do. We've got Archie versus Predator, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, the last Iron Fist story, and of course, kicking off in October, our month of horror comics, Deadpool, Dracula's Gauntlet. So, lastly, there's also loosely on the schedule a TV party tonight for the new Matt Groening show in the same universe as Futurama, Disenchantment, with friend of the show in our Canadian office, David Wright. So that's all the things we got going on. If you're wondering we've had a shit ton of stuff go up this week. We've had a lot of stuff from source material. Jesse went off and did his own thing with Evan Bevins. They talked The Thing. They talked the new Fantastic Four. We also put up our Zatanna show featuring friend of the show from Honeysuckle Rose Creations, Alexis Haina. Damn You Hollywood did our summer wrap-up. Pat Mullen and I just recorded a TV Party Tonight Extra where we reviewed Earthquake versus Tugboat from the 1991 Super Tape 3 tape.
I saw that.
And finally, if you've been missing the old political shows here on the Rattle Legend Broadcasting Network, Jesse Starcher and I spent almost 2.5 hours reviewing the new OTEP, where we probably reviewed the album for about 20 minutes, and the rest of that time was spent talking the politics of the album and other topics. It was a great episode, a lot of fun. He and I talking about the Trump administration and whatnot. But somewhere in there, we also reviewed the Silly album. So that's OTEP, Cult 45 on the Metal Hammer of Doom. That's all the stuff I've got to plug. Sean, do your plugs and take us home, buddy boy.
Okay, everybody. Well, for a change, I actually have some news to bring about. First off, earlier this afternoon, somewhat out of nowhere, I'd actually been working on it for a few days, I posted my first entry to my personal blog in close to a year, my first of what's hopefully going to become a regular series of them. Head over to comercodex.wordpress.com. It's a very personal, introspective series, much of it about recovering from depression for the past few years. The title of the blog is The Re-Education of Sean Comer, Part Number 1, Wiggle Your Big Toe. Give it a look. It's long, kind of lays bare a lot of nerves, but it sets the stage for a lot more that I plan to write soon, both in the nerdier variety and, again, in the more, sentimental, deeper side. You can follow me on Twitter at Comer Codex anytime you want for all of my various geeky pop culture ramblings. Over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Comer Codex, I'm going to be on tomorrow night for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours. Starting from, and again, you'll want to check Twitter for this. Depending on what I decide to do, I may start at 6 with some competitive Overwatch grinding for my series The Forge, in which I try to climb my way up from being triple-digit bronze up to about as high up the ladder as I can possibly go. Right now, I'm about 400 points away from silver, so might be an exciting watch. And then starting from about 8 or 9 p.m. Central Time, I am going to start streaming the Banner Saga 3 as part of my review for W2Mnet.com. The reason why I said that September 4th was going to be an interesting date is because that means that I am going to be literally recording on trial while I'm on the road. Like while I'm going to be either driving or a passenger, because I am going to be driving 18 hours from Kansas City, Missouri to Salt Lake City, Utah to go co-man along with my wonderful friend and traveling buddy Carrie, the Honeysuckle Rose Creations table at Salt Lake FanX Comic Con. So if you happen to be wandering the convention halls, hint, hint, Robert Winfrey, if you happen to be stopping by, come by the table, say hey. Carrie has said that she is thinking about possibly getting me a medieval style cosplay to wear. So I may be in costume. If not, look for the N7 armor stripe hoodie and the chap with the long hair sitting in front of a laptop or tablet. Can't possibly miss me. And extra bonus points and many, many huge jet bear hugs if you will bring me by something caffeinated. Otherwise, that's about all I've got going on lately. Most of those projects are going to be recurring. So, again, Twitter, @ComerCodex. I also have an Instagram at the same name, as long as you don't mind workout clips and photos of my food, whatever I happen to be cooking at the time. But otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Sean. You're not. Remember to always enjoy your burrito and never dull your colors for someone else's canvas.
All right, thank you for joining us on the Rattle Legend Broadcasting Network's TV party tonight as we close the loop on all things Jenji Kohan. For Sean Comer, I'm your mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Rattledge. Be well, be safe, and behave.